In this video, we explore the alarming transformation of Donald Trump from a global leader in the fight against climate change to a figure often criticized as a climate villain. With sweeping actions such as withdrawing from the Paris Agreement and rolling back crucial environmental regulations, Trump's early presidency sent shockwaves through the global community. We'll delve into the implications of slashing funding for climate science, reversing critical carbon policies, and silencing vital discourse on climate change. Join us as we unpack the consequences of these decisions and hear warnings from environmentalists and scientists around the world. 1. Withdrawing from the Paris Agreement. One of the most significant and controversial moves made by the Trump administration was the decision to withdraw the United States from the Paris Agreement. This landmark international accord was designed to unite countries around the world in the fight against climate change. Trump's decision marked a departure from the leadership role America had previously taken in global climate efforts. It sent shockwaves through the international community, with many leaders expressing disappointment and concern. The withdrawal was seen as a symbolic rejection of the scientific consensus on climate change. Critics argued that it not only tarnished America's reputation but also hindered global progress in addressing this pressing issue. As the world watched, the U.S. went from being a climate leader to what many deemed a climate villain. 2. Rolling back environmental regulations. Upon taking office, the Trump administration embarked on a sweeping rollback of environmental regulations that had been put in place over the years. Over 70 regulations were targeted, many of which aimed to protect air quality, water resources, and wildlife. These rollbacks were often justified under the guise of supporting economic growth and reducing regulatory burdens on industries. However, environmentalists and scientists warned that dismantling these protections could have dire consequences for the planet's health. The administration's approach was widely criticized for prioritizing short-term economic gains over long-term environmental sustainability. This aggressive deregulation strategy further solidified the administration's reputation as being unfriendly to environmental causes. 3. Slashing funding for climate science. In addition to regulatory rollbacks, the Trump administration took decisive steps to cut funding for climate science and renewable energy programs. This move significantly reduced the resources available for research into clean technology and climate solutions. The administration's budget proposals consistently sought to slash funding for agencies like NASA and NOAA, which play crucial roles in climate monitoring and research. By depriving scientists of the tools and funding they needed, the administration effectively stifled innovation in renewable energy. Critics argued that these cuts would hinder the nation's ability to transition to a low-carbon economy and undermine efforts to combat climate change. 4. Reversing Obama-era carbon policies. The Trump administration also targeted Obama-era policies aimed at reducing carbon emissions, particularly from coal-fired power plants. By rolling back these regulations, the administration allowed coal plants to operate with fewer restrictions, potentially increasing greenhouse gas emissions. This move was in line with Trump's campaign promise to revive the coal industry, but it drew sharp criticism from environmentalists and public health advocates. Many argued that the rollback ignored the economic realities of the declining coal market and the growing competitiveness of renewable energy sources. The reversal of these policies was seen as a step backward in the fight against climate change, with potential long-term impacts on air quality and public health. 5. Silencing climate change discourse. Under the Trump administration, federal agencies, including the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, were instructed to remove mentions of climate change from their websites and reports. This directive was part of a broader effort to downplay the significance of climate change and its impacts. The removal of climate information was seen as an attempt to suppress scientific discourse and limit public awareness of the issue. Critics argued that this censorship undermined the integrity of scientific research and transparency in government. The silencing of climate change discourse further alienated the scientific community and fueled concerns about the administration's commitment to addressing the climate crisis. 6. Opening public lands for drilling. In a move that alarmed conservationists, the Trump administration removed protections for national parks and public lands, opening them up for oil and gas drilling. This decision prioritized energy development over conservation, threatening the natural beauty and biodiversity of these cherished landscapes. The administration argued that increased drilling would boost energy independence and create jobs, but opponents warned of the environmental risks associated with such activities. The opening of public lands for drilling was seen as a stark departure from previous efforts to preserve these areas for future generations. It raised questions about the long-term consequences for ecosystems and the communities that depend on them. 7. Eliminating fuel efficiency standards. The Trump administration's decision to eliminate fuel efficiency standards for cars was another controversial move with significant environmental implications. These standards, originally implemented to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the transportation sector, were reversed in favor of less stringent requirements. The rollback was justified as a measure to lower costs for automakers and consumers, but it was criticized for increasing pollution and fuel consumption. Environmentalists argued that the elimination of these standards would hinder progress in reducing emissions and transitioning to cleaner transportation options. This decision further highlighted the administration's lack of commitment to addressing climate change. 8. Weakening the Clean Water Rule. The Clean Water Rule, designed to protect streams and wetlands from pollution, was weakened under the Trump administration. This regulatory change allowed industries to discharge pollutants into waterways with fewer restrictions. The weakening of the rule was framed as a move to ease regulatory burdens on businesses, but it raised concerns about the potential for increased water pollution. Critics warned that this decision could jeopardize the quality of drinking water and harm aquatic ecosystems. The rollback of the Clean Water Rule was seen as a setback for environmental protection efforts and a threat to public health and safety. 9. International condemnation. The Trump administration's climate policies drew condemnation from international leaders, who viewed the U.S. withdrawal from climate commitments as a major step backward. Countries that had looked to the U.S. for leadership in the fight against climate change expressed disappointment and concern over the administration's actions. The decision to abandon the Paris Agreement was particularly criticized, as it undermined global efforts to limit temperature rise and reduce emissions. The international community's response highlighted the isolation of the U.S. in climate diplomacy and the potential consequences for global cooperation. The administration's policies were seen as a betrayal of the collective responsibility to address the climate crisis. 10. Warnings from environmentalists and scientists. Environmental activists and scientists sounded the alarm on the potential long-term impacts of the Trump administration's climate policies. They warned that these actions could set climate progress back by decades, exacerbating the challenges of mitigating and adapting to climate change. The rollback of regulations, funding cuts, and suppression of scientific discourse were viewed as significant obstacles to addressing the climate crisis. Experts emphasized the urgency of taking action to reduce emissions and transition to clean energy, warning that delays could have irreversible consequences. The administration's policies were seen as a cautionary tale of the dangers of prioritizing short-term interests over the planet's future.